This video would not have been possible without the translation and preservation efforts of the entire Mega Man community. Most of these games were either in Japanese or lost media until recently, and I would not have been able to make this retrospective without the help of all of those dedicated people. I cannot thank you all enough for your hard work. I like Mega Man. I just want you to know that, because by the end of today, you might think otherwise. Welcome back to Mega Man Battle Network. I can never leave. I was gonna do my next video on something entirely different, but then over the holidays, a huge lost media story developed, and, well, we'll get to that. But anyway, today we're going to be jacking into the wondrous world of Battle Network's lesser-known entries. It's easy to forget just how huge Battle Network was during its peak, and so despite being a spin-off series itself, the sub-brand had a half-dozen side games set within its universe, creating a four-dimensional time-space loop of spin-offs within spin-offs. I won't spend time introducing the characters and concept of the universe, because I figure you already know all that if you clicked this. Though I have videos covering all the mainline games already if you want to get caught up to speed. As I always say, be aware the first few are old and not up to my current standards and feature a ton of outdated opinions and mistakes. We've got a lot of aggressively mediocre ground to cover before we reach the good stuff, so it's best to start tearing through these things. Playing Mega Man Network Transmission is like watching $1 million be run through a shredder in real time. A game with a perfect concept that was so clearly rushed and untested that it sours the entire experience. Network Transmission was the very first supplemental Battle Network title, released March 6, 2003, but taking place in between Battle Networks 1 and 2. You know, even though it released after the third one. Network Transmission is built on the premise of a classic-styled Mega Man platformer set in the usually RPG-focused Rockman EXE universe. A simple but surefire idea. How hard could it be? Our side-scrolling adventure begins with Lan and Mega Man dicking around after their defeat of the Life Virus, and what the heck are these dialogue portraits? I've spent long enough working on these videos to recognize every goddamn piece of promotional art for this franchise, and this shit is promo art with MS Paint expressions slapped on top. You couldn't have gotten a guy to spend like 2 days to at least draw portraits for the main characters so it wasn't as obvious? I know it seems like I'm nitpicking right out of the gate, and yeah, I'm kind of doing that for comedic purposes, but also this weird, rushed-seeming lack of polish is going to be prevalent through the whole game. You'd think the console game would have higher production values than the mobile one. The brothers' peace is quickly interrupted by Den area burning to the ground. Hang on. I've seen this somewhere before. Not like they're hiding it, but this intro is a clear reference to the oven scenario at the start of the first game. Or possibly from the first episode of Rockman EXE, called NT Warrior in America. This game has a handful of ties to the anime. The animation studio and TV Tokyo are credited on the title screen, and hell, the NT in NT Warrior stands for Network Transmission. If you messed around with a few small details, it could have taken place in that continuity instead. In fact, it probably should have, because it being in the game continuity just causes weird little lore problems. Right from the jump, you can see that Lan is using the Progress PET from Battle Network 3, the one he uses from the start in the anime, rather than the original silly big-ass gray keyboard monstrosity he uses at first. The characters are voiced, and they're played by their voice actors from the Japanese dub of the show, though no English dub existed yet at the time, so there's no option for it. The game's hero and credits themes are also both remixes of Kaze wo Tsuki no Kete, the opening for the first season of the anime. Lastly, for now. There are loading screens that depict Mega Man using styles, forms that did not exist until Battle Network 2 and don't appear and aren't referenced anywhere in Network Transmission. But in the anime, Land and Mega Man did use these throughout the first season. I wonder if the team thought they were making a game based on the anime at first, or were given the anime as reference material and just were not informed that they were separate continuities. Oh, shit, fire, right. Network Transmission is a 2.5D platformer that at a fundamental level plays like the middle chunk of the classic Mega Man games. Blue Boy can jump, shoot, load up a charge shot, and slide. It all plays perfectly fine. Feels like you're playing Mega Man, control-wise at least. The level design is, okay? Sorry for being so wishy-washy here. It does rely a bit too heavily on Remember That Thing from Mega Man 1 and 2, which gets old as the things they choose to reference are the annoying parts of those games. The Quick Man instant kill lasers, Iceman's disappearing blocks, Gutsman's falling lifts, and the stupid drop and grab the ladder with the last possible pixel of your hands thing that every Mega Man franchise is full of. But those are pretty rare set pieces. Overall, getting from point A to point B is usually pretty painless, and sometimes even, dare I say it, fun. But when you add in all the secret mystery data and Zenny caches you'll be expected to find, the stages can get bad. There are a lot of near frame perfect jumps in this game, far more than any other Mega Man platformer, whether that be just long distances that you can barely cross, navigating through one block wide spike mazes, or a truly concerning amount of these jump at the last frame as you exit a narrow passage things. Aspects that would be considered more advanced Mega Man techniques are called upon far more often than they probably should be. I'll be fine. I've played all the Mega Man platformers a million times, but this game is meant to be for Battle Network fans. A game that is, if you can believe it, not a platformer. There are also crazy amounts of blink and you'll miss it one try areas that you either know about and reach easily or are oblivious to and have to replay the entire level to try again. Usually these involve jumping down pits in specific spots or holding up to grab something as you drop. It's the first choice that is clearly just here to encourage backtracking and increase the game's length. After all, your traditional Mega Man game is maybe 2 or 3 hours tops, but it's not the main culprit of this repetitive design philosophy. The most massive change to Network Transmission, and where the whole experience begins to rapidly devolve, is the incorporation of RPG elements. Just as in Battle Network, you're not intended to use the Mega Buster as your primary damage output, and it sucks ass through a straw at first to hammer that point in. No, you're encouraged to use battle chips. Codes are absent, and you're rather limited to 5 chip types from up to a 10 chip folder window. When Land sends the data to Mega Man, they take on usage requirements similar to Robot Master weapons, swapping between each attack and having to consume weapon energy, taking the form of memory now, to use them. But there's another layer to this that may take you a stage or two to passively notice, because I swear the game does not explain this very well. You also have a set number of uses for each chip. However, that number isn't static based on the chip as you might first assume, but is determined by the number of that chip you own, up to a predetermined max number that is different for every chip. But that is not a hard limit. Your chips will be refilled to the total number that you own whenever you leave a stage and enter again. As an example, if you've picked up 10 cannon chips, you'll be able to use a maximum of 10 cannons in a level before that chip set expires, regardless of how much memory you have. You won't be able to use cannons again until you jack out, at which point your stock will be refilled. You may already see the hitching point here, but let me spell it out for you. This system means that this is a mostly linear stage-based platformer that encourages and almost requires grinding. That's not just coming from me either. There are instances of the game outright stating to your face that you should be replaying levels to gather resources. It was purposefully designed this way. And some of these chips, like Invis, Dash, and Double Jump, are utility chips that are vital to getting around in later stages. So you'll want to have as many of them as you possibly can. And the fact that these utility chips are locked to the selection process instead of being flat out enhancements or upgrades means that you'll have to waste your guaranteed chip selection pin on things like the Double Jump at all times for secrets and collectibles. And the last thing you want is to have to wait for the custom gauge to refill because it takes a fucking eternity. This whole chip selection mechanic is fine in concept and a cute way of incorporating Battle Network's gameplay, but it's needlessly over-involved and engineered to be as tedious and annoying as possible. Each chip should be infinite and just use up different amounts of weapon energy, right? Why add a second consumable resource? We don't need mana and spell charges on top of random drops and random folder pulls. Why are there 4 aspects going into me using one ability? And hey, on the subject of as annoying as possible, a boss fight. From what I've seen online and what I've been told, Fireman is actually a pretty strong stopping point for a lot of people when they first try this game out, turning off a lot of people from even continuing, which is great because he's the first boss. See, when you're still figuring out the oddball chip system, you may have used your bubbler chips that the game starts you out with because, well, you just started the game 3 minutes ago. You have no way of knowing it at the time, but you played yourself. Elemental weaknesses still exist in this game, and those bubblers are the only aqua chips you have access to at this point. With them, this boss is effortless, and without them, you will fucking die. Fireman's primary attack takes out about a quarter of Mega's HP and has to be avoided with a very precise slide underneath it. But there's a high chance a new player will not notice that at first because they'll be overwhelmed and panic during the boss fight due to all the previously mentioned factors, and game over in 2 or 3 hits, kicking you to the title screen. If you compare it side by side to classic Mega Man bosses, you'll see that the network transmission bosses don't really give you time to breathe. They don't have a scripted downtime where they jump or move around the arena or something like that. They just do whatever they want whenever they want. Sometimes they'll give you a second to breathe and plan out what to do next, and sometimes they'll just spam attacks over and over again and there's nothing you can do about it. There are healing sub-chips that can be purchased, similar to E-Tanks, but we don't really have access to those yet. And you can't even get some extra lives as a buffer because those also work like the chip system for some fucking reason. You start with 2 lives, but your max can be raised by finding blue backup chips. As with other varieties of chip, these can only be refilled by leaving the stage, and even then are exceedingly rare compared to all the other collectibles in the game. So since you likely died, buck up, press start, sit through the unskippable opening cutscenes again, then use everything you just learned to throw yourself at the stage again and hopefully put out Fireman for the second time. Afterwards, Match shows up to insist to Lan and Mega Man that he was not operating Fireman during this attack. The pair obviously don't believe him, but when telling Yuichiro about the incident, he's able to confirm what Match said. This isn't even the only recent instance of Navis acting on their own like this. The bizarre behaviors seem to be the result of an infection spreading through the cyber world called the Zero Virus. Oh, fuck off. You're not wasting the Zero Virus on this game, are you? Oh, God. The Battle Network Zero Virus is an abandoned World 3 project locked away in the cyber world until recently. Like its original series namesake, it too corrupts Navis and turns them violent and unresponsive to their human companions. The next 80% or so of the game is Lan and Mega Man investigating different incidents around Dentech City for clues that lead them to the one responsible for spreading the virus in the first place. The explorable areas are divvied up into 2 halves, the surface net and the actual stages. The surface net consists of the den and global areas, room after room of pale green cube mazes and weak starter enemies that you'll have to return to and traverse time and time again for plot purposes, visiting Numberman's store, or to unlock new levels. You will be positively sick of looking at this place by the time the credits roll. The real stages unlock in chunks for the most part, with 2 or 3 levels opening up at a time based on the story, and giving you some degree of classic Mega Man stage selection. Now, like classic Mega Man, you might think this means the stages are of similar challenge levels, but no. This game has no sense of balance progression outside of some viruses being different colors later on. There are bosses near the end of the game that are like picking flowers compared to some of the bosses from the first level set. Let me give you an example. Once you defeat Gutsman, yes, of course there's a Gutsman boss, don't be stupid, Lan gets a bunch of messages from his other friends about Zero Virus related disasters around town. One of these is the shopping center, one of the best looking stages in the game, but it's unfortunately the home of the worst boss. The newly debuting Brightman.exe. Brightman has at his disposal a way too long laser that he aims at you, a wandering elect ball that slowly follows you and I swear cannot be avoided no matter how long you kite it around, and a shield that makes him invincible against most attacks that don't hit the very specific awkward spot near the top of his head. This is the one Navi in the game that even after fighting a dozen times, I still have no godly idea how you're intended to fight him. When I originally streamed Network Network Transmission, I was so stuck here that it's when I learned you can grind for Navi chips using the Ghost Data machine in the park. Needleman would be my recommendation. He's available in the first batch of stages as well. His level is easy, and his element is wood, making him strong against this sparkly ass. Needleman is also a pushover to beat, as he just sorta slowly seizes across the screen. Much like the last boss from this set, Iceman, who, if it were up to me, would have been the first boss, as he's unquestionably the easiest one you'll be faced with. He helplessly slides around and occasionally spits at you, but that's hardly worth mentioning when stacked up against every other Navi so far. Now, all of these issues can be mitigated by just playing the bosses enough to learn their patterns, like every video game in existence. If we're gonna argue that playing against something enough to learn exactly how it acts makes a boss good, then there's no video game that has a poorly designed boss ever, because you could always just practice more until you figure it out. Someone beating Dark Souls with a potato does not mean the tree boss doesn't fucking blow. The biggest issue with the boss behavior, and I sort of alluded to this earlier when I compared it to classic Mega Man, is that their behavior does not feel structured. In a franchise where one of its most well-known aspects is having readable, understandable, and consistent patterns to learn for every boss. And a handful of the most infamous bosses in the entire series are bosses that explicitly do not do that. It's not even hard, it's just sort of confusing. If the OST didn't still slap in expected Mega Man fashion, I probably would have lost it trying these stages over and over to reach the boss again. It's one of the few aspects of the game I can praise with no caveats. As you clear more stages, you'll be getting Zenny, of course, to spend at shops. The chips are next to worthless. Most of them are unique, but the random drops will do just fine. And besides, you're gonna need that money for other items. Sub-chips exist in the form of multiple sizes of healing chip, MP restoration, and chips that make the custom gauge charge faster for a limited time. But we're still not at the stuff you need to be buying. That would be HP memories to raise max health, mem ups to raise max MP, several hundred unlockers to open the excessive amount of locked mystery data throughout the game that shouldn't exist because the purple datas are hidden behind movement challenges anyway, so why do I need an item to get to them? And lastly, power-ups. Taken from Battle Network 1 and 2, power-ups are used to level the 3 stats on Mega Man's Buster: power, fire rate, and charge time. Before power-ups, the Buster is trash, and with them it becomes a fucking satellite laser. Ignore rapid and throw all the power-ups you can find into maxing out charge, and then strength. The charged Mega Buster becomes the strongest and most accessible weapon in the game, and kills even sturdy enemies in 2 hits. The game quickly breaks at this point, though, when you can just ignore the overcomplicated battle chip mechanics and obnoxious secret paths and focus on playing the levels. Network Transmission not only becomes much more enjoyable, but the difficulty curve sharply reverses, becoming easier and easier with each Navi defeated until you obliterate the final boss with your hands behind your back. This makes collecting power-ups your top priority, and where the lion's share of your Zenny should be funneled to. And you're gonna need to make a boatload of dinero to get these things. Each of these upgrades can be found in stages, but the purchasable ones get exponentially harder on your wallet each time one is purchased, because Numberman is a filthy fucking price gouger, hashtag fuck Numberman. As we're now completely jacked and can tear through most levels like a wet paper bag, let's see what other vicious ne'er-do-wells the Hikaris will be taking down. Plenty of returning faces like Alekman, Pharaoh Man, etc., but also a number of brand new Navis. The mischievous virus spreader Starman, Swordman, and Gravity Man. There's even some Battle Network 2 bad guys in here, Quickman and Shadow Man. Hang on. Network Transmission takes place before Battle Network 2. Why are 2 of that game's bosses here? Lan should not know who they are yet. Also, there's no Speedy Dave, so what's the fucking point? Blow through a few more levels, and our heroes, with the help of Eugene and Dr. Hikari, finally track down the origin point of the virus to its hidden resting place, the Zero account. What the fuck is that? Why was Zero's cool lightsaber replaced with a big plastic nipple? You know what? Time to talk about this. I can't 3D model for shit, so far be it from me to criticize a professional's work, but these things are like all kind of jank. The 3D modeling in the game isn't abysmal, but they've got weird stocky proportions and awkward posing. They animate like cursed stop motion characters. Mega Man, look at my precious boy. What happened here? Fuck, forget just the characters. Why are the stages all entirely made of squares? That's so basic. Even the NES games looked like actual places most of the time. Heck, Mega Man Legends looks better, and that is a fully 3D game, not just a side-scroller, and it was almost a decade before this. These people aren't talentless. Arika made Street Fighter EX. How did they forget how to make 3D models? This lack of polish, due to what I assume is Capcom giving them no money and no time, is present in almost every single one of these spin-off games. This is not an issue that will be going away. Of course, it's not always the developer's fault, and I understand that, but I'm still going to point these things out. Post-SmackDown, Zero laments his existence as a virus that's taken a more advanced form and is now capable of understanding the damage he's caused and will continue to cause just by living. I'm glad to see the effort, story writers, truly I am, but his character had absolutely no chance of ever taking hold because this is an 8-hour platformer, not a 25-hour dialogue-heavy RPG. Zero's exact fate is up to the player, though you would likely never know this on a normal playthrough. The game does nothing to indicate that this is an influenceable event. The standard ending is Proto Man arriving at the last second, as he's contractually obligated to do, and delete Zero. That's it. To get the good ending, your intended course of action is to go to an area of the main net that looks no different than any other area, and that you have no reason to visit yet, and collect this source code. If you collected this before the Zero boss fight, Dr. Hikari will mess around with it, and Zero will have his virus neutralized, so Proto Man will let him live. If you grab the source code after killing Zero, nothing changes. The boys will say the same lines, send it off to Yuichiro, and then nothing happens. He doesn't even email you to explain what the data was. The game just forgets about it, rather than maybe mentioning what it is, so on a second playthrough you'll know what to do with it. Oh, trust me, I'm despairing right now. This pale ghoul, who doesn't even really look like a Battle Network character, is the Professor, a high-ranking member of World 3 who adopted Wily's goal of blowing shit up out of spite and is recreating the life virus to that end. I have nothing else to say about this character. The fellas go down through the Undernet to reach the area where Life Virus R is being reconstructed and have to go through just the most miserable stage to get there. The only enemy in this world can only be damaged by chips of their weakness element. Even if you knew about this ahead of time, the odds of you pulling all 4 elements in one turn is very low. So you're faced with either waiting around all day to swap appropriately, or just take out the few that you can and run your stupid fucking face through the rest of them. Boss Rush, you knew it'd be here. The Buster should be super buffed by this point, and it makes short work of this goon gauntlet. Then they do the Lance friends show up at the last second to help thing, and it's really, really funny because this is the moment it dawned on me that Glide is not mentioned a single time in this entire game. No 3D model, no portrait, nothing. What a meme, folks, what a meme. The final boss, the Life Virus R, goes down pitifully, same as its daddy. The only part worth mentioning is its second form, where it's reduced to a larval state. It's not challenging or anything, but it is a fun reference to the flying Wily capsules that typically follow the final boss in classic Mega Man. The Professor is arrested thanks to the efforts of random Scilab guy who doxed his livestream, and everyone's brain is wiped so they never mention these events ever again. The game then, hilariously, drops an end credits stinger advertising Battle Network 2, a game that by this point had been out for over a year. Goddamn. Network Transmission should have been the best of both Blue Bomber series, but wound up miraculously being the worst of both. Taking classic Mega Man's occasional issues with way too many spikes, trial and error level gimmicks, and most weapons being not worth it compared to the Buster, and mixing it with Battle Network's currency grinding, random chip hunting, and backtracking, created a game that feels like it's strangling itself at every possible opportunity. The real bitch of this whole thing is that I still like this game. This was the first game I ever streamed, and so I've got this powerful nostalgia blocking up my brain that gives me a sick emotional attachment to a game that, in all honesty, is not very good. Yeah, Network Transmission wasn't the only attempt at reverting Mega Man back to a 2D side-scroller. Around the same time, Japan would get Rockman EXE WS, the WS standing for Wonder Swan. I'm no expert on the topic, but if you aren't aware of this console, the Wonder Swan and its upgrade, the Wonder Swan Color, were Japan-only cartridge-based handhelds created by Bandai. They were somewhere in the neighborhood of competing with the original Game Boy and Game Boy Color before the Game Boy Advance completely destroyed them. Being developed by Bandai, who has their hands in basically every kid's anime you can imagine in some fashion, the Wonder Swan was a kids show tie-in machine. While the game says it was created by Bandai, it was actually created by Tosei Software, a game developer notorious for not being notorious, as they're a ghost developer that's basically never credited on anything they work on. The plot is a very loose adaptation of the first season of the anime, which is a very loose adaptation of Battle Network 1, making this game a tie-in of an anime in a different continuity based on a sub-series of Mega Man. You only realize how bizarre it is if you really stop to think about it. You go from Fireman to the Life Virus over the course of about 45 minutes. Not much to break down or analyze in terms of story. Getting into the game, Rockman WS, as I said, is a classic Mega Man style side-scroller. Jump, shoot, charge, shot, slide. Unlike Network Transmission, which rather accurately captured the Blue Bomber's movement, Mega Man is slow in this game. He feels uncharacteristically heavy, not slippery or carrying too much momentum, but like he's wading through knee-high water the entire time. The ability to use battle chips still carries over from the RPGs. Aside from upgrades and melee weapons like swords and fists, which have infinite use, every battle chip is consumable, having a single use before dissipating. You can assign up to 4 chips to the Y buttons at a time to use on command, and change out the slots whenever by pulling up the pause menu. There's about 40 or 50 different chips in the game, which is more than fine, and not just because the game isn't that long or because the chips aren't really that strong in general, but because the Buster Cannon is a real option from the start here. It's about on par with the Buster in any other classic Blue Boy adventure. Program advances are still here if you need that extra power, but they make the lackluster Battle Network 1 program advances look like goddamn Master Style in comparison. Once I figured out how to even use them, it's down twice on the movement buttons, by the way, I was the definition of underwhelmed. The advances barely do more damage than a standard charge shot, and those don't delete 3 chips to use. You're not gonna be needing them anyway. My usually suboptimal desire to sort everything to death in Battle Network finally comes in handy on the old Wonder Swan. All but 2 bosses in the game can be killed easily by equipping a sword and face tanking while jamming the B button. It simply does more damage than the boss can deal back and works 9 times out of 10. What bosses you'll face, and in tandem with that, what levels you'll be playing aren't rigidly set. The stages are laid out in such a way that you likely won't even notice there are multiple levels to choose from at first. After deleting Fireman from the Oven Comp, each preceding level splits into 2 paths. You'll start out on the surface net, then at some point you'll find yourself entering a doorway that'll bring you to a themed cyber world. You clear the area, defeat the enemy Navi, and then return to a new section of the surface nets. All of said stages have at least 1 unique battle chip, and 4 of them will activate Mega Man's style change when completed. That is to say, there are 4 specific levels that drop style changes. Styles make their return here as selectable forms for Mega Man that each have their own enhancements, alongside their elemental weakness, of course. The 4 main styles are the same 4 that appeared in the first season of the anime. Aqua Custom, which has a faster charge shot, Wood Shield, rocking higher defense, Elect Team, that graciously boosts Mega Man's movement speed to a more tolerable level, and Heat Guts, which allegedly takes out most enemies in 1 hit, but truthfully is just slightly more powerful than the usual Mega Buster. The other buffs are way better. If you gather all 4 styles, which will require at least 2 playthroughs of the game to visit all the required stages, then beat the final boss again, the Hikaris will gain Hub Style. Wasn't featured in the anime, but a nice inclusion. Even if it does maintain its game properties, the perks of all the other styles at the cost of half HP. With Hub Style in tow, you'll then unlock one last world in the Undernet that ends with a fight against Gospel that comes completely out of nowhere, but I'll accept the extra content. Everything sounds just dandy so far. What's the problem with this one? Well, the level design is Every level is full of spikes, you're almost always over a bottomless pit. Enemies are strategically placed to come in from off-screen and knock you into said pits and spikes. There are level gimmicks that murder you with no prior indication. Hell, as an example, even the disappearing blocks are done in such a way that they've gone from a bit of a pain to the game flat out cheating. The timer is no longer consistent between each platform set. You know, the boom, boom, very consistent in and out timer, easy to follow. Yeah, it's gone. Which is great when stacked on top of the other new trait they have, rather than 2 blocks existing at the same time, so you can have a better idea of where to jump next and have some time to react. The previous block instantly disappears the second the new one spawns. This takes what was originally a mostly trial and error stage hazard and makes it a 100% trial and error stage hazard. Then you've got the same short-sighted, we hid basic movement abilities in one specific area thing that Network Transmission did. There's an area grab chip that increases your movement speed, undershirt that bolsters your defense, and more to my point, there is the air shoes chip which boosts Mega Man's jump height. This upgrade is only located in Snake Man stage, which thanks to the game's structure, is 100% optional and missable. I wouldn't mind this as a little bonus to help with platforming, but a decent portion of the game's extras require the air shoes. Without them, you'll not only miss a chunk of secrets, the secrets you can reach will require you to just kill yourself because you can't jump back to the main path with a normal jump. That doesn't take into account the way that most of these additional rooms are blocked in the first place, with these featureless walls that deflect all but one attack in the whole game. Which attack? It's different every time, so you'll just be rapidly opening and closing the menu over and over to try every battle chip and form you have, hoping that one of them is the super secret special sauce that will break open the path. Don't have the right tools for the job? I don't mind pickups being locked behind multiple runs. This game is barely an hour long, but allowing you to easily go somewhere where you will have to die to escape if you don't have an arbitrary item is pretty scummy. I bring up these things to warn you if you decide to play the game yourself. That's why I decided to highlight these little annoyances. But even with all that said, in the same vein as Network Transmission, the game is a 6 out of 10 Mega Man platformer if you don't bother with completion. While the controls aren't as good and the hazards can be a step above in terms of dickish placement, the advantage here with Rockman WonderSwan is that unlike Network Transmission, it's pretty short and there are no overbearing RPG leveling mechanics that make getting those secrets vital for progression. I'd easily play the game again if I had to.
John, how could you possibly say the game is okay? You just complained about it for 10 minutes.
Sure, but it's still Mega Man at the end of the day. Maybe I'm too easily impressed, but it's just really hard to fuck up the basic Mega Man formula. Even a mediocre Mega Man game with a buttload of little design issues is still a decent time. Overall, I would say that WonderSwan edges out its GameCube counterpart by the smallest bit, as its time put into enjoyment ratio is a little bit more favorable. This is gonna hurt. Mega Man Battle Chip Challenge is, in my opinion, the most uninteresting Mega Man game. I would rather play the atrocious DOS games because at least those are kind of funny. Released in between Battle Networks 3 and 4, Battle Chip Challenge revolves around a net battle championship that almost every character in the series up to this point is competing in. This competition takes the form of a deck building game, spat onto the Game Boy Advance by Indie Creates, who would have had their hands full with the Mega Man Zero games at the time, and boy does it show. Chip Challenge was also released on the previously mentioned WonderSwan Color, under the name Rockman EXE and One Battle. Aside from having a cut-down chip library and only featuring Land and Mega Man as playable characters, it's essentially the same experience, so no need to cover it separately. When you press start, you'll be greeted by a fresh sight for this series, a character select screen. Franchise mainstays Land, Eugene, Dex, and Mail are here, accompanied by 2 kids who only show up in this game. The boy is Kai Todoroki. He's got a bit of retroactive continuity, stated to be one of the passengers on the malfunctioning bus from Maddie's murder-filled traffic scenario in Battle Network 1. He idolizes Land for saving his life and wants to be a hero like him in Mega Man. Kai's Navi is Turboman.exe, based on Turboman from Mega Man 7. The girl is Mary Toa, a half-Netopian exchange student staying with Yai. Mary has a heart condition that requires her to have a pacemaker, managed by her Navi Ring. While clearly inspired by Ring Man, she's the second female Navi in the series and one of only 3 in total, which I guess is what happens when you slap man on the end of everyone's name. Mary's avoidance of overly stimulating isolating situations and frequent lengthy hospital stays that many pacemaker owners have to endure has made her quiet and reclusive with no real friends to bond with. So in case you've lost track, they gave 3 different children a fatal heart disease. Who is in charge of deciding this shit and what is wrong with them? Ring, being more energetic and outgoing than her operator, enters Mary in the tournament against her wishes, hoping it'll help her meet new people. Well, that is a touching little backstory, so I decided to pick Mary as my operator. I would later come to realize that this was a terrible decision because Ring has low HP and the lowest deck size limit of the 6 main characters, so she struggles in the early game. Oh balls. Now we get a look at the menu. No overworld, no minigames, and no dungeons to be seen here. Navigation is done solely through this menu. You've got the PET where you set up your Navi and battle chips, the shop that I'll rip into in a bit, the open battle area, which is a survival mode where you fight an increasingly numerous series of random opponents in a row for rewards, and lastly the tournament grounds where you pay an entry fee to net battle in a set of themed matches to make actual progress. The tournaments are split into difficulty classes, with each having a gimmick like panel types or what kind of attacks the participants specialize in, so you have some idea what kind of folder you should bring to the festivities. Pick a bracket to challenge, and let's talk about the combat. Battleship Challenge is not an action RPG. Rather, it is a deck building game. Do not misconstrue my words. Not a card game. A deck building game. In Battleship Challenge, both navies are displayed on a narrow field above their deck. The deck has a series of 12 slots. The 10 slots branching from the center are for your primary attacks. The first slot represents your Navi, and from there the game will randomly decide on a path to take, determining what battleships will be used that round. There is no way for you to influence this. It's entirely luck-based, and the AI has no reservations about selecting empty slots or slots that contain chips that will not help your situation. Once the paths are decided, the round commences with both navies taking turns activating chips until all 3 chosen slots have activated on both sides. The decks then return and the process repeats. The other 2 slots on the deck, mapped to L and R, are for slot-in chips. When enough turns pass and this meter on the bottom fills up past at least 50%, you can attempt a slot-in, which will use the chip in that spot for an extra attack. The higher the percentage, the higher the chance of the move succeeding. Why, yes, my dear viewer, that does mean that the only interaction you have with gameplay is still random. And that's what we're working with. You put cards on a board and the game plays itself for a minute while you watch until it decides if you win or lose. Wait, this sounds familiar. It hit me very early on in my playthrough, and I'm sure I'm not the first person to make this observation, that Inti Creates somehow in the mid-2000s created an idle game? You know those dumb phone games where you pick a few units and then they automatically attack each other outside of maybe one skill button that you can press? You know, the worst kind of mobile game? It's just one of those. Now, if you're wondering if there's some incredibly sophisticated deck building strategies that make up for this lack of depth, you'd be half right. Battle chips all have a memory cost, and your total available memory limits not only the chips themselves, but the number you can use. For the first half of the game, you just will not have enough memory to fill every slot on the deck, certainly not with anything good, which raises your chance of the game giving you a bad empty path. The enemies do not seem to be bound by this memory restriction, though I could be wrong. The chips can be divided into a handful of general categories based on their effect and the type of damage they deal. The first and most important chip is your Navi chip. This decides your Navi's base stats such as HP, memory, and their elements. You can switch these whenever you want, so from a gameplay perspective, it doesn't really matter which character you picked in the long run. Navi chips are pretty rare and usually take the form of boss rewards. Then you've got the expected stuff. Chips that damage the opponent, chips that shield you in different ways, and chips that offer support like buffs or healing. On top of those, there is a new category of chip that revolves around dealing chip damage. That is to say, dealing damage to the battle chips themselves. See, each battle chip has their own health value, meaning they can be destroyed if they take enough of a beating. You can remove your opponent's chips for the rest of the encounter, and they can remove yours if their attacks deal enough breakthrough damage. At first, this all looks like it lends some sneaky tactics to the game, deciding to focus on overwhelming the target with damage or destroying their means of attack. Should I focus on a few powerful chips or weaker chips to fill the board and get more consistent turns? Maybe I should use a barrier chip in slot 2 to block a super powerful attack the enemy has in slot 2. In theory, these thoughts are accurate. In practice, fuck you, roll the dice. To begin pointing out the structural failings that will cause this building to collapse, you have the turn order, which participant uses their chips first. It is not a basic, you go first, opponent goes second layout. Hell, when you start playing, you'd be forgiven for assuming it's fully random like everything else. I was confused for a long ass time how the turn order functioned. I thought maybe it was related to melee versus projectiles, maybe it's based on elements, maybe the chip's accuracy affects it. Well, my friends, it would seem that each turn's flow is laid out by each battle chip's priority. So in a game like this, where all you do is vaguely choose what chips will be selected, you would think it's very, very important to have any idea what each chip's priority is, right? How are you meant to strategize if you don't know when each move will come out relative to the other moves? Well, thank God then that every chip has a speed stat that determines turn order. And you can't see it. There is no in-game way to check chip priority. I want to be charitable and say this was a mistake, and the reason I'm saying that is because the Mangled Wonderswan port does show the speed stat. All of this luck-based shit makes it a Herculean task to even determine if your deck is good or not when you start out. It's hell to get a handle on whether you need to change tactics and what you need to change because the outcomes and flows of net battles are so wildly inconsistent. Sometimes you'll get destroyed by the boss of a tournament, rematch them, and then you'll win with a couple hundred hit points left. You have to play this game for a long time to feel out what builds are actually good and optimal and which ones aren't worth rolling the dice on over and over till you get lucky. But what does any of that matter if you don't have any good options to pick from in the first place? This game starts out hard. You'll get walled as early as the second set of tournaments, which all feature different elemental panels. The starter navies do not have an element, while the enemies of each bracket will be built entirely around it. You've got lava panels that can damage you every turn if you don't have a fire attribute, or ice panels that destroy your accuracy. Stuff like that. Thankfully, most of these can be removed, but you'll need some appropriate chips to do so, which means you're gonna need a way to buy chips. Which means you're gonna need to clear the novice bracket half a dozen times to win the prize money. And then once you have a good amount of change jingling in your pockets, hop over to Higsby and oh, what a wide select, oh no. If you've played enough anime tie-in mobile games, you know what's happening here. In line with its prophetic abilities to only predict the worst aspects of the future, this game from 20 years ago not only predicted idle games, but also pay-to-win random card pulling. And make no mistake, it is pay to win. The combat is too chaotic. No amount of skill or forethought will help you if your chips aren't up to par. The game simply is not complex enough. All the guides I checked for help when I was first learning the game would simply say to use the same handful of overpowered chips in Viz, Anti-Sword that I had not pulled. There are no HP memories or customizer programs. Defeating enemies for drops and the chip gacha are the only ways to gain strength. You do get occasional memory limit enhancements from beating certain tournaments, but that's still just more room to put more chips, so my point stands. Once I learned all this, it took me about 8 or 9 hours of vanilla gameplay before I could not stomach anymore and made the executive decision to run over to the Rockman EXE zone and grab the chip control mod by Prof9. This does exactly what it says on the tin, giving you control over the deck selection path. Does this make the game too easy? Not as easy as you'd think. The mod does increase the AI's odds of picking their strongest paths to compensate. Also keep in mind, you still need to be pretty lucky with accuracy and chip drops to keep up against later enemies. But if I can win a battle while selecting the chip order, I could have also won it by just retrying over and over with the same deck. The way I see it, this just takes out the 5 restarts before the inevitable victory. This is the best way to play Chip Challenge, and it significantly improves the experience, but it is not the game most people played for 20 years, and it is not the game Capcom released. So forget I mentioned it for the rest of the video. I've played nearly every Mega Man game that exists over the years, and barring those meme-worthy DOS ports, Battle Chip Challenge is, to me, the worst one. Or I suppose technically N1GP is the worst one because it's the same game with half the content. Battle Chip Challenge is a strategy game where you cannot properly strategize. It has next to zero player input and keeps even the most basic concepts, like whose turn it's going to be, hidden from you, and leaves it to guessing just like every other part of the game. It doesn't even have the decency to have an interesting style or eye-catching presentation. Even the OST is the essence of mid, which is a travesty for a Mega Man game. While the main battle theme is pretty good, most of it is generic sounding GBA tunes, and the remaining few tracks are just Pokemon? I have to issue a formal apology to anyone that this disappoints. I know there were some people hoping I would be the difference maker here and say this game is some overhated hidden gem, but I can't lie to you. If you like this game, you go right ahead. If it's any consolation, it's not even that the game is terrible that bugs me, it isn't. For what it is, it does function. There's a pretty good amount of content, and it's not glitchy or anything. My hang-up is that the bulk of the experience is watching indie creates play with themselves. It might feel as though I'm being reductive, but the random factors of the game sort of prevent any more complex planning. These strategy elements that could be engaging are watered down by you having no way to guarantee that those strategies go into effect. The game isn't about creating a winning hand. It's about doing everything in your power to avoid creating a losing one. It's risk mitigation, the game. But you know, brushing all that aside, even when everything is working out for you, you've learned how to manipulate the game in your favor, and you're winning, it's still boring. Once you've gotten a few good chips and figured out how to counter each type of enemy deck, the game becomes a mindless string of battles where you slap the deck you know can win against your opponent over and over until RNG doesn't screw you and you come out on top. And the way I look at it, a game being occasionally frustrating and boring is 10 times worse than it being aggressively awful. Awful is interesting. Awful is fun to critique and laugh at. Mega Man Battle Chip Challenge is a perfectly okay, unoffensive game in a genre I have no interest in. It's filler, made of a bunch of reused assets to squeeze a few more dollars out of a property that was super hot at the time. Nothing more than that. As its name implies, Battle Network 4.5 Real Operation was released between the 4th and 5th. What the fuck? Released between the 4th and 5th main entries, and was used as a sort of testing ground for making multiple navies playable before it showed up properly in Battle Networks 5 and 6. That's right, 4.5 sees you taking control of around 24 net navies from across the series, each with their own special quirks and abilities. Sounds like a great concept for a Battle Network game, so let's jump into that story to get things rolling. There's nothing here. You can wait as long as you want. This is not a narrative-based game. And with so many playable characters and no visible operators, it never really could have been one. The game takes place entirely within the cyber world. Putting it out there right away, this pretty significantly dropped my interest in 4.5. As many gigantic headaches as the Battle Network stories and scenarios cause, they're still an important part of the game to me. Most of my memories of the series, positive or negative, are about cutscenes or dungeons or set pieces. Having narrative reason and structure and puzzles on top of the battles is a vital part of the experience in my eyes, and it's why a ton of Battle Network fan games, even the ones that I acknowledge are pretty good, don't hold my attention. They always skip the exploration and puzzle side of Battle Network, which I think is just as important as the combat. But I'm getting sidetracked here. In Real Operation, you start with only a small handful of navies that greatly expands as you clear events. After selecting your character and answering a series of Facebook quiz-style data collection questions, you're sent to the PET home screen, where you can deal with various options, talk to your Navi, get their advice, or just a bit of flavored text that fleshes out their personalities. The game's many real-time clock features make their debut here, with your Navi given fortune readings, acknowledging holidays, and letting you know about certain in-game events, all relative to the time and day you're playing. This is the good part of the date-based gimmicks. The bad part comes later. Each Navi even has their own UI color scheme and a unique menu theme that's usually a remix of their NES counterparts. When you're done admiring these sick jams, you can finally jack in and take control of your Navi in the cyber world, just like in a standard Battle Network game. There's no real-world interaction here, as you're meant to be the operator using the PET, so there's just the one static jack-in point. The net's the same concept though. Explore, talk to NPCs, visit shops, it's all here. Yeah, don't worry, random encounters are still here too. This may look like your typical Battle Network arena, but that is far from the case. That Real Operation on the box comes into play now. The purpose of this title is to make you feel like Batman. I I mean like an operator. 4.5 plays akin to how Cyberworld encounters are presented in the show, with operators sending chip data and making strategic calls based on the situation, while the Navi maneuvers and performs basic actions themselves. This means you cannot move your Navi with the D-pad. You can only select a target and offer a general distance to try and maintain from the enemy. Turns are also eliminated, replaced by a rotating selection of 3 random battle chips from your folder at the bottom of the screen. Each chip has a color that denotes how much of this data meter it will require. You also have the option of sacrificing a portion of this meter to re-roll your current chip selection. You decide when each battle chip is used still, thankfully, and your partner will usually teleport to the proper range to hit their target. Emotions are absent, but counters stuck around, generating a chunk of memory for the custom gauge, so there's still a reason to counter. But you better have those chip timings and counter windows perfectly memorized, since there's now a slight delay between pressing A and the attack occurring, making your window to react even smaller. 2 special actions can be assigned to L and R that differ slightly depending on your Navi. Most every Navi has a P shooter, a charge shot, and a more varied skill, like Mega Man being able to guard, Bass having his various special attacks, and Roll being able to generate a chargeable barrier. The system in its entirety is a fun concept. It's 100 times better than Battle Chip Challenge, and I adapted to the changes without much hassle. And while the AI in real operation is acceptable and hell, downright impressive at times, there will be times where it will seemingly break entirely. Like, it gets lost, loses track of what it should be doing, and starts taking easily avoidable damage. This happens most often when obstacles are involved. It's like the AI isn't capable of planning ahead and can only react to the present situation. It doesn't predict patterns of what will happen next, so it'll often corner itself in obvious trap spots where it shouldn't be standing. Though to be fair, I'm sure the developers were given 12 days and $3 to throw together this side game made to promote merch, and if I take that into account, the computer does do a decent job of not totally embarrassing itself. What if I told you there was an excuse for all of this, though? What if I told you the reason the game is so automated and hands-off is because, well, you aren't meant to have your hands on the system at all times? Enter stage left, the Battle Chip Gate, a Japan-only peripheral that can connect to the Game Boy Advance, allowing the player to slot in real-life battle chips for their Navi to fight with. I would wager that this Battle Chip Gate is the culprit for this game's lackadaisical automated approach, because you are meant to be rifling through your folder and inserting battle chips in real life. And if this was the case, and I was capable of playing this the way it was intended, this would be the coolest fucking game to ever exist. Actually having a Navi on your mobile device and giving them orders while slotting in battle chips would have made 10-year-old me lose my goddamn mind. And the sheer novelty of the situation would absolutely overpower the goofy AI and bizarre structure. But unless you are a very eBay-savvy Japanese speaker with cash to burn, you'll be like me, stuck with a piece of novelty software with the novelty removed. Like playing Wii Sports with a GameCube controller. Yeah, sure, it's probably fine, but you're kind of missing the point. In short time after learning the combat, you'll need to start hammering away at the main goal the game gives you, competing in smaller net battle tournaments until you've earned the right to participate in the official tournament and become the super bestest operator of all time or whatever, while also occasionally having to deal with Nebula's Darkloids, who have begun to sink their fangs into the cyberworld. Don't bother being in a big rush to make progress. You'll notice within minutes of starting that everything is locked to you until you've earned an apprentice net battler license. So you find the guy issuing the test, answer a handful of questions about the Battle Network combat system, and Bob's your uncle, now you can enter the major tournaments. You have to do this for every Navi you play as. I don't know what they were thinking, but every time you switch Navis, you have to do this exact same test over and over again, including the questionnaire. It only takes like 10 minutes, but seriously, why do I have to do this every time? Is this a glitch or something? Is this even intentional? Doesn't matter, we have a mission to accomplish. Let's go to the organizer's desk and sign up for... Excuse me? Are there any other competitions open? What about this free tournament? Oh, only available during these hours. You can't be serious. Is this entire game time-gated? Wow, a massive chunk of real operation is strictly limited to very specific real-world time windows. Certain hours of certain days at certain places. That's how everything works here. To join a main tournament and unlock more characters and... Just kill me now, they did not use that fucking music again. To join a main tournament so you can unlock more characters and areas, you have to sign up for a special event at least a day in advance, then come back on the weekend to participate. These weekend tournaments are the only way to legitimately unlock a decent portion of the characters if you don't want to cheat, and you can only unlock one at a time. Even the generic everyday tournaments are only open at 9, 1, 4, and 8. I don't know about you, but when I was a kid, I would have been at school or driving to and from school during 3 of those time windows. The Battle Chip Gate was one thing. That seems like a genuinely fun gimmick, but this? It's the same crap I said before with Battle Chip Challenge. Capcom somehow accidentally predicted the worst aspects of what mobile games would become. 4.5 containing time-specific FOMO elements to encourage you to log into the game every day. And it heavily limits your daily progress, which feels like a precursor to the stamina systems that so many games have. There are 2 ways to remove these time gates. The remove isn't really the word. You can never really remove the clock features because too much of the game relies on them. What you can do is manipulate them. First off is the set time option on the title screen. Hey John, if you can change the clock whenever you want, what's the big deal? You see, my ill-informed little friend, that button does not only allow you to change the internal clock, it bankrupts you. If you alter the timer in-game, all of your money is deleted to discourage its usage. But if you want to avoid that, there are certain totally normal, legitimate Game Boy Advances that have a real clock function that checks the time on your PC to determine what the in-game clock should display. This means technically you could constantly save the game, quit, change your computer's clock manually, then boot the game back up, and it should be tricked into thinking time has passed as long as you don't go backwards or something. After you eventually qualify for tournaments, you and your Navi will start to receive email updates about the Darkloids beginning to infect the internet. Most of these Darkloids are corrupted Navis from Battle Network 4, though there's no half-baked mini-plots tied to them this time. The news lists an internet area where a Darkloid was spotted, then you drag your ass over there and check all the corners to find their invisible ghost. It's the same method that's used in the mainline games to refight old bosses. You do this over and over until you win the official tournament and wipe out Nebula. You run smack into an obstacle pretty quick though, and it's how this game elongates its not really that long main campaign. Gates and tickets. Some of these roadblocks are a-okay, being mini-games hosted by various Navis that you have to complete to pass. Math with Number Man, smashing statues with Metal Man. I like these. Most of them are action and reaction based and break up the routine of walking and net battling. The other gates, though, that's where tickets get introduced. Some of these doors are locked by tickets that you can only get by completing the everyday tournaments. Which sounds cool until you realize that these tickets are temporary items. If you win a weekend tournament, which is gonna take you a bit of progress to be strong enough for, you do get a permanent pass through a certain type of door for that one Navi and nobody else. So if you want to partake in one of the game's key selling points, trying a bunch of different characters, you'll have to keep doing daily tournaments or wait until you can get all the other characters' new passes. Come to think of it, the game actually does a lot to discourage you from using multiple characters. As I just said, each character's world progress is limited to that specific character. Each character also has their own max HP that has to be raised separately and in different ways. Some characters, like Roll and Starman, collect Navi symbols that spawn in a random part of the net each day, while a character like Bass, befitting his lore and personality, becomes stronger each time he finds and defeats certain Navis to absorb their power. I like the concept. In practice, it's annoying. But another real deal breaker for swapping between characters is the chip folder. For a reason that is beyond my comprehension, each Navi has their own folder, which sounds like it might make sense. Until you have a go at building a folder for a new Navi and you see that all your chips are gone. If a battle chip is in another character's folder, that chip is MIA. You can't use it on any other Navi unless you unequip it first. This creates completely pointless busy work where you have to make sure to pull out all your best chips before jacking out, and then constantly rebuild your folder each time so you still have access to them with everyone else. I don't understand why the game is so against you easily flip-flopping between Navis when it's very clear that you're intended to do so, given all the character-specific roadblocks clogging up the streets. That's about it for Real Operation. The truth is, I can't break this game down at the level it deserves. Real Operation is designed from the ground up to be a portable, peripheral-based experience that you chip away at in small pieces over weeks, if not months. But for me, it isn't portable, I don't own the peripheral, and I need to get this video out. I'm not gonna say that it's bad, because I don't think it is. Honestly, I don't know. I don't want to judge a thing for not being a thing that it isn't trying to be, when the thing that it is trying to be sounds really cool. there's just a lot of time, money, and ocean, and 20 years keeping me away from appreciating it. Maybe someday I'll invest in a battle chip gate, and a repro cart with the English patch, and battle chips, and a Game Boy Advance that works, and fuck it, I'm too poor for this shit.